Gaze upon the gold-plated face of perfection, you terrestrial pedestrians. It is I, Commander Sterling, here to remind you that even though things are bleak, even though it's a really hard year, a really difficult year for everybody, the Commander is just fine. The Commander is doing so well. I am still Rise's Grand Champion Regent. I have a Kenner Bull Alien. Which also is good. I got these goddamn fucking Street Sharks animation cells. Oh. I swear that's Extreme Dinosaurs. Is it or not? Like, let me know in the comments. I might read them. Oh, fucking hell. Please note that the crocodile fella in the wife beater and the sneakers without socks driving a golf cart is ferrying what appears to be desktop PCs and... Jawsome. I've got 15, the complete television series starring Ryan Reynolds. It's shit. Oh, this whole thing? Oh, I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but I'm the champion regent of Rise, so that's good. Oh, also I've got my own private dancer, Craig! Craig! Dance for the people! Dance! Dance! Keep going. That's enough. Now keep going. My dear friends, today I come to you with a dilemma, a real ethical quandary. I realise that usually you were the ones who come to me for unflinching wisdom and guidance. I accept that to many of you, I have often taken on a counselling, parental, perhaps even messianic role in your life, that without me you might not necessarily be completely lost, but you're certainly flying without a compass. If you need compasses to fly, I don't know how planes work. Do pilots just do what computers tell them to do these days? I think you just need to follow the birds. They gotta be going somewhere. And while we may never know how pilots fly their steel demons above God's natural clouds, one thing I do know is this: crunch is bad, and that's terrible. Crunch, if you didn't know, is the all-too-common practice of coercing game developers into working stressful schedules punctuated by dangerously long hours and tight deadlines. This has led to genuine mental and physical health problems at studios like BioWare. It's burnt out the creativity of developers at Naughty Dog, NetherRealm, and Epic Games. It led to hundreds of Telltale Games employees being screwed out of money owed for 2 AM work shifts. It's created high-pressure environments where anger and beration is used to bully employees at studios like Rockstar Games. As one might gather from the frequency with which we touch upon it, crunch culture is one of the game industry's biggest problems, and it's about far more than simply hours worked. The tight deadlines and endless pressure from executives have created environments of terror and intimidation. Many crunch stories are punctuated by an overwhelmingly expressed fear for people's livelihoods, with recollections of abusive work conditions almost always shared under condition of anonymity. People who speak out in this industry soon find their career prospects burned to a crisp, so only those completely done with the business are liable to speak out on the record. When the already abusive nature of crunch culture mingles with existing problems, the results can be horrifying. There are too many creative directors in the so-called AAA industry who think their shit doesn't stink and that because they're self-styled geniuses they can insult and degrade and bully anyone on their team. The nepotism and lack of safe places for employees to speak up craft a particularly fertile atmosphere for further abuses. As we've seen at Ubisoft, only recently Michel Ancel became the latest in a long line of Ubisoft higher-ups accused of highly inappropriate behaviour. To his limited credit, Ansel doesn't appear to be one of the several rapists Ubisoft has hired and protected over the years, but he nonetheless has been outed as a dehumanising brat whose indecision and poor management directly led to crunch problems with his games, including the decades-long mess that is Beyond Good and Evil 2, which he quit Ubisoft in the middle of working on, though he denies he left Ubisoft to get ahead of the reports exposing him as a bullying piece of shit. But hang on, I mentioned a dilemma, didn't I? I said I had a quandary, and then went on to describe in no uncertain terms why we should remember that crunch is a fucking blight on the video game industry. What exactly is the issue here? Well, I think some of you know already. For you see, while I continue to believe that crunch is a crutch used by bad industry leaders who pass the buck of their executive failings down the ladder to their already overworked staff, while I think crunch and those who defend it are simply bad for the game industry, CD Projekt Red does it. And they are good. At least I think they're good because they made a game I like. The Witcher 3 was a really good game, wasn't it? And big, and it didn't have loot boxes in it, which I'm informed is the only bar you have to clear these days. And it's so fucking good, isn't it? God, CDPR is always so good to the gamers. Remember when they came out against DRM? Fucking pro gamer move right there. And I love how against microtransactions they've always been. Like when they said they wouldn't be in The Witcher 3. Remember when they said, no hidden catch, you get what you pay for. No bullshit, just honest gaming like with Wild Hunt. We leave greed to others. That's what I like about CDPR. When they say something, they stick by it, especially when it's pro-gamer. Look, CDPR made a hugely critically acclaimed game and is championed by many as the pro-customer antithesis to those big greedy companies like EA or Activision. You can see the bind I'm in, right? It's easy to criticise the EAs and Activisions of the world for the shitty things they do because people already don't like them. People like CD Projekt Red. When CDPR does something shitty, it's not my job to call it out, but to make excuses for it. It's like that time I called Devil May Cry 5 out for arbitrarily shoveling microtransactions in, and even though I was saying nothing I hadn't said about other games for pulling the same shit, suddenly I was being a big meanie head and picking on poor Capcom. It's always just fine when I'm shitting on EA or Activision or Ubisoft or 2K Games, you know, the companies it's safe to shit on, almost as if we true hardcore gamers, which I'm one of you, right? You know that, are applying our ethical standards based not on what's actually bad, but on who's doing the bad things, and whether they have a product we're excited about buying with our money that we have. There's one thing a number of the gamers, like what I am, have taught me over the years. It's that my criticisms are perfectly valid and useful when I apply them selectively, but not when I dare to expand them universally. Once I demonstrate a consistency to my beliefs, that's when problems start. It's no wonder Twitter doesn't do it, because sometimes popular companies do unpopular things. So don't worry about it. I've been made well aware that it's my job to excuse them here, because before I so much as even intimated I'd be doing a video on the recent news, that CDPR would be going back on its word when it said it would avoid crunch because it will actually now do crunch on Cyberpunk 2077, gamers were sending me messages and letters with pre-prepared excuses for me to use. Because it's different when CD Projekt Red does things we rightly shit all over Epic Games for, isn't it? It's different when it's a purveyor of a game we really loved that has another game we're really looking forward to. Principles are difficult. CD Projekt Red is no stranger to crunch. It's been quickly glossed over in past crunch discourse because, well, because people like CDPR, but allegations of unreasonable work expectations, oppressive pressure, and coerced overtime have followed the Witcher studio around for years. For example, in 2017, CDPR was raked over the coals by allegations that their crunch was some of the harshest around. We read about Bungie's crunch and Mass Effect Andromeda crunch and laughed, and crunch will hit the current project hard, because spreadsheet planning plus incompetent overseers equals hemorrhoids, bad back, and depression. We call that the Sterling Special. The company has been accused of fostering a culture of blame and an extremely politicized work environment, where success is determined more by who you know than whether or not you're talented or qualified. These are all allegations that could be and have been leveled at Ubisoft as well, where office politics and buck passing allowed abusers of all kinds the freedom they needed to hurt dozens of people, both in and out of their company, company. Crunch culture is already high-pressure environments where people are encouraged not to complain. Of course, abusers flock to it. But CDPR made The Witcher 3 and is soon releasing Cyberpunk 2077, for God's sake. It's a critically acclaimed studio with critically acclaimed games, and it's said so many right things in the past. It's hardly surprising then that people were quick to believe, with no small amount of relief, CDPR's bosses last year when they said they would be putting a stop to crunch on the aforementioned Cyberpunk. It was something they very proudly announced, making a point to tell reporter Jason Schreier. This was great news because it provided what so many self-styled consumers want: the ability to not feel any guilt when buying a product they want to buy. At least that was until this week, when it turned out that nope, despite its proud promises, CD Projekt Red would indeed be requiring its staff to crunch like wild on Cyberpunk 2077, a game that apparently needs a last-minute period of intense rush jobs despite being out in a mere matter of weeks, and having already been prepared for so-called final certification at the beginning of September. Cyberpunk's developers will be burning the candle at both ends, hurting themselves and their families for your video game product entertainment. And it's very much a cost worth paying to some people, whose only real cost in this whole venture is the $60 needed to buy the game. As I said earlier, I've already been inundated with justifications for this crunch. The chief excuse is that under Polish law, the Cyberpunk team will have to be paid for their overtime, and that CDPR will continue to offer a 10% annual profit split with staff. Now, don't get me wrong, those are good things. Just like if I forced anybody to do something but at least gave them money for it, like an indentured servant. Or like when a gangster in a movie tells you to take the bribe or sleep with the fishes. Forcing someone to do a thing isn't really forcing if you hand them cash, right? Maybe you could even photograph the workers holding the check to prove they consented and are cool with it. I think another industry has done that and it never came off poorly. In any case, I think we can all agree that when corporate leadership tells us that the people who rely on them for a career and a life tell them they're happy, we should take that at face value. There's zero power imbalance that would skew such feedback. After all, let's note that nobody's being physically forced into crunching. They're all just acutely aware that refusal to crunch is the end to their career prospects in a world where reliable income is increasingly hard to find, and even the most entry level of jobs are excessively competed for. There's nothing about that scenario that seems unfairly weighted in favour of the employee, and could threaten the integrity of management's statements when it says everything is fine. And CDPR head Adam Badowski has already told us that the employees are happy with this. He's been very quick to tell us that his workers are happy, though weirdly he doesn't explain why those workers, when able to speak freely without threat to their livelihoods, or at least anonymously, describe a culture of misery, depression, hostile conditions, because that's what they do when they can speak off the record, and all he seems to say in response is, well, the way we make games isn't for everybody. No, it's not, and by the sounds of it, it shouldn't be for anybody. But here's the thing, CDPR is a critical darling. Like Quantic Dream, another studio that's largely been able to get away with abusive work practices because the right people approve of its product. CDPR is a critical darling, and when Cyberpunk 2077 comes out, the majority of mainstream publications will lap it up uncritically, like they always fucking do. And because it's CDPR, because it's one of the good ones, it will be allowed to behave exactly like one of the bad ones, and the wider game-playing community will actively shout down anyone who dares mention the uncomfortable truth about how Cyberpunk was made in their Cyberpunk reviews. You already know how any reviewer who dares mention it will be treated, because you've seen what happens whenever anybody reminds us that even the good companies in the so-called AAA game industry are, by and large, a load of fucking shit that doesn't deserve your $60 base price at launch. I mean, fuck's sake. Even Ubisoft still has simps who are defending it and excusing it and apologising for its quite literal rape culture because they want to play the 10th fucking Assassin's Creed game. Anybody wishing to hold CDPR to account for anything doesn't stand a fucking chance. But hey, at least CDPR has said that Cyberpunk 2077 won't be making any political statements, which, incidentally, is something companies accused of abusive work conditions gravitate towards doing. No idea why that is, by the way. No idea whatsoever. Anyway, the game industry needs unionisation. As my terrestrial alter ego, Tim Sterling, has said in the past, crunch is not a triumph of the workforce, but a failure of the management. And every time we have seen these stories of crunch, the story does tend to go the same way. Management failed. As we discussed last week with Eon Must Die and Limestone Games and Focus Home Interactive, that is at the core of so many of these crunch environments. Management and publishers imposing these deadlines on creators, and the creators are saying, this is unreasonable, and management's all, oh, you can do it, you're a creative genius, oh, you can do this, no worries. And then, months later, when the deadline's approaching and the developers couldn't do what they said they couldn't do, all of a sudden it's, why didn't you do this thing? You said you could do this thing, you're shit at your job. And that's not even getting into what this show has discussed in the past, about how working people over 50 hours a week isn't even productive, because it turns out working people to the point of exhaustion just makes exhausted workers. Dance. Thank God for me, but do it without speaking. Do it! That's enough. It's not enough.